And it's going to be a long night. Let me tell you that. But viewers, in the end, the Biden-Harris administration has played true to form. In 2020, when they were elected, many analysts who examine American electoral outcomes from an Indian lens said that the India-US relationship enjoys bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. This measure of goodwill across the aisles will mean that India will retain its star valuation under a Biden Democratic presidency. This takeaway was specially trumped up, excuse the pun, because of Biden's weep's ethnicity. Yes, Kamala Harris's Indian roots. It was assumed will have the quote potential to change Indian engagement with American politics as well as the United States, unquote, as well as responses to issues in India, unquote. But there was also a small minority of Indian analysts that injected a realistic caveat. They said that Biden's pledge in his victory speech to restore the US's, quote, respected leadership on the world stage, unquote, and to, quote, honestly confront the challenge of nations that are backsliding on democracy, unquote, could potentially lead to friction points in Indo-US ties. These realists also felt that these irritants would have ordinarily manifested themselves under Trump, largely because of his isolationist approach to foreign affairs. 4 years later, the motley group of pessimists have been mostly proven right. India-US relations, while on even keel on geostrategic, trade, technological and military matters, have been somewhat thrown off balance by an ideological disconnect. Biden and Harris have both spoken out against what they believe to be our, quote, India's human rights violations, unquote, fueled by policies like the CAA and NRC that are, quote, inconsistent, they've said, with the country's long tradition of secularism and with sustaining a multi-ethnic and multi-religious democracy, unquote. There have also been unflattering mentions in reports prepared by the US State Department of India's alleged, quote, descent into electoral autocracy, unquote. So much so that at least 3 Democrat lawmakers even boycotted Modi's congressional joint address when Prime Minister Modi was accorded the rare honor by President Biden on what was a storied state visit a couple of years ago. Over time, much to Delhi's chagrin, the Biden-Harris administration has privately wagged its finger at India's sanctions-defying, quote, oil diplomacy, unquote, with West designated, quote, rogue state, unquote, Russia, and not so privately at Delhi's adventurism with respect to allegedly taking out Khalistani terrorist and US citizen Gurpant Singh Pannu. The Biden administration is also suspicious of non-West multiracialism, which India has fetishized as an example of its strategic autonomy. This was recently evidenced by the condescending tone adopted by the White House's spokespersons on the just concluded BRICS plus Kazan State Summit. The prospect of an even more liberally inclined, Western values imbued Harris administration wielding power on the back of a decisive mandate would lead to a spell of more moralizing on the international stage. New Delhi's foreign policy managers may never acknowledge it openly, but they must be suitably ambivalent today at the prospect of a Harris presidency. They will, of course, have to sweat it out for another 12 hours before the results are out. If that is, the country votes decisively. Viewers, we have already experienced 4 years of Trump. But Kamala Harris, even though she was vice president, we don't know her as an occupant of the West Wing of the White House. Viewers, we don't know her as an individual shaping policy towards India in the Oval Office. We can only guess that she was consulted, but vice presidents usually don't have that remit. Could have been different with Mr. Biden, but viewers, we'd never know unless Mr. Biden writes a tell-all. So, viewers, I'm positing the question, will President Kamala be less moralistic in office, in the Oval Office if she wins, than Biden and she were over the last 4 years, viewers? Let's open this question out. Tim Romer, Foreign American Ambassador to India, is here with us. Harsh Shringla, former Indian Ambassador to the United States. Lisa Curtis, former Senator, is also here with us. Let's open this up for a conversation. We'll also be joined, of course, in just a few minutes by Shalabh Kumar, who is, of course, a Trump advocate. Lisa Curtis, many people will say that, look, even if Harris comes into the Oval Office as a president with a big mandate, there will be continuity. There will be no major disruptions. But as I've pointed out, there are some irritants now in our relationship with the United States, and some of them are sticking up from under the carpet and could actually trip this bonhomie, so to speak. Do you see that intensifying, that glare, that sort of perception that America is big brothering India in some ways on certain issues, ideological issues?
Well, thank you for having me. And I just want to make one correction. I've never been a senator. I actually worked in the Trump administration. I was a deputy assistant to the president and a senior director in the National Security Council during the Trump administration from 2017 to 2021. So I just want to make that correction. But to your question about whether a potential Harris administration, there might be some irritants or friction in the U.S.-India relationship, I think that's entirely possible. Look, by and large, I think the Biden administration has put a lot of effort into building up the U.S.-India relationship. You have the ISET dialogue, the technology dialogue. You have the fact that the Biden administration last year agreed that the U.S. and India would co-produce jet engine technology, which was a major milestone in the relationship. The Quad, of course, has been elevated. The Quad was started or revived in the Trump administration in 2017, and the Biden administration has carried that forward and elevated it. So there has been quite a bit of positive momentum in the U.S.-India relationship. However, there have been a few irritants that you referred to. One is the alleged assassination attempt against Panun, the U.S. citizen on U.S. territory. Also, the differences over Russia. And just recently, we have seen the listing of some Indian companies violating the sanctions policies in terms of providing equipment that facilitates Russia's defense industrial base. So certainly there are some irritants there. I think President Biden had really sought to compartmentalize and put aside some of those differences, of course, allowing the Department of Justice investigations to continue on the Panun case. And of course, the listing of the companies, that's also a process that happens periodically. It's not just Indian companies. There are several companies internationally that have been in violation of the Russian sanctions, kind of allowing that to happen, but at the same time, prioritizing the strategic partnership, the U.S.-India strategic partnership, and making sure that moves forward. And so I think it remains to be seen what Harris would do if elected, but there certainly are some irritants there that would have to be very carefully managed. So the question is, would she be able to manage these in such a way that insulates the strategic partnership from some of these areas of friction?
So we're essentially talking about compartmentalizing the relationship into different boxes, if you may, Lisa Curtis. Okay, let me just open this up. That's an interesting point of view. Can she actually create these little compartments where you can sort of leverage one over the other, etc., but not really disrupt the apple cart, mixing metaphors? But Mr. Shringla, let me bring you in on this. This is important because, look, America will decide in the next 24 hours. We might actually be in for a long week, some people say, but let's say we'll get a fair sense in the next 24 hours which way this election is headed. Mr. Shringla, who will the Modi administration be most comfortable with? Trump is transactional. He may not be, because of his insular sort of outlook, may not be too bothered about India's internal affairs. The Biden-Harris administration has been. I mean, it's talked about Article 370, the abrogation of it, 35A, it's talked about the CAA. You know, I've sort of defined those to you. I know you probably won't wear your exact opinion on your sleeve, but privately you'd admit that we'd be sort of more comfortable with Trump?
So, I think all along, in terms of our relationship, we have made it a point to work with any administration in the United States. I mean, Prime Minister Modi had a great connect with President Obama. He had a great connect with President Trump. He has a great connect with President Biden, and he knows Vice President Kamala Harris very well. So, from that perspective, I think we have made it a point to work with any administration, and that has been reciprocated from the US side, because every president has added to the relationship. So, the momentum in that relationship has been carried forward by every president contributing substantially to taking that relationship strategically forward. And I think irrespective of who comes into the presidency, and I really mean this, I mean, you may feel that I'm hedging. And it's my diplomatic side of things.
You worn your hat very close to your skull, and you've decided that I'm not going to give this guy even a little bit of encouragement. But look, I have to ask you this, Mr. Shringla, you can't really be serious. I mean, we have a problem where apparently America shared intelligence with Canada. I mean, it clearly hasn't prioritized India in the manner it does Israel, for example, even though India plays a pivotal role in the Asia Pacific. I mean, you've got to be looking at that.
Can I put it in some perspective?
Okay.
See, the Democratic Party has its left liberal side, primarily the progressives, but also, you know, you have the unions and others, and they tend to exercise disproportionate influence on the presidency, whoever is president. Now, President Biden, given all his experience and the respect he enjoys, has made sure that he has kept the relationship above these distractions. I mean, he has made sure that our relationship has been insulated from some of these distractions, and which is why you had many of the achievements that Lisa just referred to, you know, whether it's the Quad or whether it's involving Prime Minister Modi in all of these major conferences that he hosted on democracy, climate change, etc. But it's only towards the end of that presidency that we saw many of the issues that you raised come up. And I would also look at it from the point of view of President Biden's own grip on the administration actually slipping a bit, given his age and the other factors that led him to withdraw from the race. And of course, I would say that you have to give Vice President Kamala Harris the benefit of doubt. There is no doubt that she has been close to that part of the Democratic Party.
I mean, you've had, Mr. Shringla, forgive me for interrupting, 3 Congress people who boycotted the Prime Minister's speech in the House. They didn't show up. It was a state visit. I mean, imagine had that happened in India with some of the opposition leaders or even ruling BJP MPs not showing up for a joint address. Supposing, Obama gave one. Tim Romer knows about that when he came to India. So imagine if that had happened. That's an embarrassing situation for any president to deal with, isn't it?
So President Biden, I think, has tried to steer the relationship away from some of these distractions. I mean, that's important to note. Having said that, you want to know what President, Kamala Harris would do if she comes into the White House. And my own sense is that she would come under the same pressures that President Biden came under, but we will have to give her the benefit of doubt. I mean, at the end of the day,
why should we give her the benefit of the doubt?
Once you take that high responsibility, you understand that global strategic partnership that we talk about is very, very critical to the United States. Okay. And once that is established, once you get a very, very firm sense of that relationship and the importance that it enjoys, then you will, I think, take the necessary steps to safeguard the relationship from the distractions. Let us not...
suddenly become more pragmatic and less idealistic. Okay, let me bring Mr. Timothy Romer in. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Romer. You've served in India, of course. You know the landscape, but it has significantly changed. You were here, of course, before Modi, the rise of what the American liberal press called the nationalist Hindutva Modi. And there is a degree of disconnect between the democratic view of Mr. Modi and the Republican view, especially under Trump, of Mr. Modi. Will this fault line that we are now seeing sort of creep in to our relationship? And we've also had a situation where when Mr. Modi went to America just about 2 months ago, a whole group of Khalistanis were invited into the White House to hold talks. And that was seen as very jarring optically. So Mr. Roma, do you believe that Kamala Harris will be less of the big brother, so to speak, or America will be less of a big brother under Kamala Harris, and we should give her the benefit of doubt?
Well, first of all, I have to salute my friend, Ambassador Shringla. I see where he gets his diplomatic talent, balancing all your very direct questions at him. He has spent a lot of time in America. He knows our system extremely well. He's been up to Capitol Hill. He knows the Democratic wing and the right wing of the MAGA Republicans. And that requires great diplomacy in our relationship to balance those different wings. Your question, I think, is a very important one. When I was the U.S. ambassador in the Obama administration, it was extremely important for me to not only have a very good relationship with the government, with Prime Minister Singh's party, the Congress coalition, but also with the BJP as the minority party and the opposition party. And whoever the Indian people picked in their elections, whether that was Mr. Modi in subsequent elections, or whether that was a regional party leader in a particular state in India, or whether that was somebody we didn't expect, we were going to put the relationship and its strategic importance front and center to make it work. So whoever the Indian people pick, there is bipartisan support in America. Whether there might be 2 or 3 Democrats out of 435 criticizing the relationship, there are the overwhelming majority of Democrats and Republicans in Congress and in the Senate that want to work out through these irritants and some of these disagreements that, by the way, India has on their side. You know, we have to work through, you know, some of India's independent foreign policy interests, whether that be buying certain Russian defense systems or buying Russian oil. We respect those decisions and need to be able to understand them and work through them, just as India has to do when we disagree with them on a particular issue, whether that be Ukraine, whether that be something in the Middle East. A great relationship managed by great diplomats like Ambassador Shringla know that the relationship between the two countries and our peoples and our values is more important than the individual that we send. Now, both these candidates will have some challenges in the relationship. Mr. Trump is going to bring maybe doubling the tariffs to Indian products, which would hurt their economy, which would hurt their growth rate, which would hurt their inflation rate, which would have significant impact potentially on the people of India. And then you bring up the point that maybe Vice President Harris, if she's elected, is going to emphasize some of the democracy components in the relationship and the human rights, which can be a bit of some kind of irritation to India at times. We will manage these irritants. We will get through these disagreements. That's what great powers do. And that's why the strategic geopolitical relationship, the people-to-people relationship that we have is so much more profoundly important than the individual we might pick from election to election.
Okay, that's very interesting, Mr. Roma. You use the expression, we will manage these irritants, but will we manage them as equals. Because I don't believe, I mean, you've talked about the diplomacy and the diplomatic foreign service corps here in India, but look at Eric Garcetti, the US envoy to India. He's been very, very direct and quite unapologetic in talking about some of these irritants. And they have chafed, let me tell you, the Indian establishment, so much so that there are many people like me who've said that let's talk a little bit about human rights violations, the way minorities are treated in America, etc., etc. So I think a lot of the heavy lifting to keep this at an even keel has been done really by Indian diplomats who haven't shot their mouth off, but we aren't seeing the reciprocity in America. And I'm only fearing that under Harris, there'd be more of an open season.
Look, when I go to India and somebody in India says to me, your democracy, Ambassador Romer, is not perfect in America, I say, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. How do we make it better? We've made mistakes in the past, whether it's been the treatment of Native American Indians, whether it's been the enslavement of Black people, but our process is an open one. We admit those mistakes. We want to work with great democracies like India and develop that best practices for both our countries to get better at practicing democracy. I don't have a problem when somebody from India brings up a problem that we have in America, nor should the reverse be true. My dear friend, Dr. Jaishankar, will say some things about India having a different strategic interest than the United States. And I respect that because India is from a different part of the world, has different interests, different relationships. We need to then work through and understand how we're coming at these different relationships and not let that divert us from moving forward and deepening the Quad and our interests in disaster assistance and sharing intelligence and security and trying to make for a more peaceful and prosperous world. We're not going to agree on 100% of the issues. Right. But this election coming up in America is going to be, who is the better foreign policy leader? Who is the better leader for American economic interests and jobs, particularly in the Midwest? And who is better on the border and reproductive rights? Okay, that's something our people are going to make a decision on today. Yeah, and we'll perhaps have a verdict. I mean, hopefully. Lisa Curtis made this point about compartmentalizing, and I think Timothy Romer is also kind of talking about that. Mr. Shringla has also sort of said that, look, we've got to focus on the big ticket issues and manage the other irritants. Now, I'm going to go across to somebody who's quite partisan in the Trump camp. Absolutely in the Trump camp, undoubtedly in the Trump camp. And I'm joined by Shalabh Kumar. Mr. Kumar, I've been asking this question. Will a Harris presidency mean more ideological fault lines will open up between US and India, potentially eroding the bonhomie, or will it be business as usual, like some panelists are saying, that we'll get through this?
No, I'm quite concerned about that. If, unfortunately, Kamala becomes the next president of the United States, then it's going to be a significant problem for Modi government, for India, because she is going to take pro-Pakistan, pro-Azad Kashmir stance, and she's going to be pushing for what she normally does, rights of the minorities in Kashmir, and they very quickly forget about Kashmir files as to all what happened to 500,000 Kashmiri Pandits, just in 1990. So that's a concern, and Jammu and Kashmir have now made a significant progress after the repeal of 370 and 35. I mean, you can't even. It's so apparent that in the last 4 or 5 years, the Kashmir has risen up from is like a phoenix from ashes. So the progress is phenomenal, and she's going to try to push back on that progress.
Well, that's a very pessimistic view, coming in from the Trump camp here. But I think Mr. Romer made that point that, look, Trump might not fixate on ideological and political issues. He could squeeze India on the trade front. His brand of insular protectionism could hurt India in terms of high-value labor outsourcing and exports and the like. I mean, we could have major disruptions on that end of the spectrum, Mr. Kumar.
Absolutely not. I can tell you that it's on the agenda to have a free trade agreement with Bharat. That's what President Trump wants, and actually that should be the case, because the number 1 and the number 3 economies in the world, the 2 largest democracies, the most powerful democracies, they should be joined at the hip, and that's what's on the agenda. And with respect to immigration, the more restrictions we put on all the people who are illegally crossing the border from the south, 200,000 per month, more than 10 million in the last 4 years under the command of the border czar, Kamala, the better off it is for merit-based immigration in the United States under the leadership of President Trump. President Trump is always for merit, for talent. That's the only thing that should count. Forget about the color of your skin, forget about the race, forget about anything else. He just goes for merit. And a recent program which has been announced by President Trump that all the graduates of American universities will automatically be qualified for green card. At this point, I myself would probably like to decrease the amount of H-1Bs because the backlog in that category has gone up to 140 years. I mean, that's really nobody's fault. I don't blame Kamala for that either, or Joe Biden, or Democrats or Republicans, because that's the way the system got set up. 65,000 H-1Bs come here from India every year, and only 7,000 are allowed to become, even though most qualified, only 7,000 are allowed to file for green card. So backlog increases. Now it's over like 1.2, 1.3 million people in that queue, and the wait time is like 140 years.
I understand all of that.
So actually, if anybody would solve that problem, is President Trump.
Okay, Lisa Curtis, let me bring you in. Will Trump be as benign as Mr. Kumar seems to suggest when it comes to protecting American trade interests? He's already, he's made a very direct, and some people felt extremely derogatory statement about India on the trade tariff front, if you might recall.
Yes, I do recall that there were statements by Trump about Indian tariffs. I think, he often made public remarks or even remarks on his Twitter account about, high Indian tariffs. The one famous one is he accused India of having 100% tariffs on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. But I think, we can still see that during Trump's first term, he tried to negotiate a trade deal with India. It didn't really come to fruition. But, I think what we would see in a second Trump term is that if we're talking about tariffs, those are going to be largely focused on China and putting tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States. I think Trump would recognize India as a friend, a good friend, a strategic partner, and that there would be differences in, the kinds of tariffs that he would institute. Right. So I think we have to keep that in mind. I think when he talks about tariffs, He is speaking a lot about China. He's talking about 60% tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States. And of course, U.S.-India trade is much smaller than it is with China. So that's one factor to keep in mind. Certainly, Trump is going to focus on trying to, break down trade barriers in India, get access for, U.S. trade, U.S. Companies. That will continue. But does that mean that the U.S. is going to do something very harmful for Indian trade? I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that, there'll be some give and take, but I think the majority of his tariff policy is going to focus on Chinese goods.
Well, I'll leave it at this, viewers, at least in this particular section, because it does appear on balance that we might have continuity, but there will be some disruptions. It just depends on what India is more comfortable in handling. The disruption on the ideological front, or perhaps to some extent, ripples on the trade front. I have a feeling, viewers, that India will be most comfortable, at least the Modi administration will be most comfortable with Trump, because he's not going to really focus very hard on some of the ideological issues that the Modi government is very sensitive about, especially because it gives ammunition to the opposition here in India. Let's continue with the focus on the American elections, but from a slightly different prism. President Trump has been there and done that. He's won an election, but he ended short of the halfway mark in 2020, becoming one of very few American presidents who didn't quite get the second term. Then, like now, he was not just fighting Biden, but an entire ecosystem, or should one say, the system. Indeed, no candidate in US history has been so reviled in the mainstream as Trump. He's taking on a hostile mainstream media, the intelligentsia, Hollywood talk show hosts, a deeply entrenched and highly mobilized, quote, wokery, unquote, global Marxists, Islamic PACs, the Greens, even the United Nations. Is all of this going to be too much for Trump to handle? And if he does lose, will his base, some say the non-elite base, reconcile, or will America be further down the road to a social breakdown? Let's put some of these questions to Professor Salvatore Babones. We know him very well here in India. He's an American sociologist, but has a view on Indian democracy too. He's also, of course, been somebody who has championed India's cause internationally. Salvatore Babones, let me ask you this question. It's a straight one. What is Trump actually against? Why does he always seem to come across as this underdog, taking on a whole system? Is this true? Has the system, what we define in the terms that I have, been unfair to Trump?
Donald Trump is an outsider politician, and he's the first outsider politician who's gained the nomination of a major political party. And that's really what's shaped his difficult trajectory through American politics, that he has not bought into the Republican Party establishment. Of course, all Democrats will oppose Republicans, all Republicans will oppose Democrats. There's no surprise there. Trump is really opposing both political parties. He may have the Republican nomination, but that's not what the Republican Party of 2016 wanted. They certainly were aghast that Donald Trump won their nomination and disappointed that he re-won the nomination in 2024.
So let me ask you this, because it's an important question. We're hearing a lot of statements from Trump's camp. In fact, Trump has just tweeted to say, look, we must take back our country. This is our last chance. It's almost like Armageddon awaits if the Democrats take over. Now, what if the election doesn't go in his favor? We've seen what happened in January 4 years ago. Will the social divide in America deepen to the point of a fracture, civil war, as many people predict, or is there going to be reconciliation?
No, look, let's be clear. There's no civil war coming in America, and all of that language is overblown on both sides. What we do see is a populist challenge to an entrenched political establishment. That's happened before in America, but it has not been so successful really since 1896 was the last time we had a serious populist, and at that time was a Democratic Party populist candidate, William Jennings Bryan, who almost won the election and didn't quite win the election. He ran for president like Trump. He ran for president 3 times, except he never actually won office. Now, when I say that it's a populist outpouring, that it's a challenge to the establishment, let me just quote you some figures as to which party people are contributing to in this cycle. Among lawyers, 80% are contributing to Democrats. Among teachers, 90%. Among journalists, 96%. And there's one great study among University of Pennsylvania professors. So this is an Ivy League university, actually Donald Trump's alma mater, where he got his degree. 99.7% are donating Democrats. Now, in the tech industry, we all know that Elon Musk has endorsed Donald Trump, and at the level of the billionaire Czech entrepreneur, things may be divided. It's hard to tell. But we have good data on employee contributions. And so for employee contributions at Twitter, 93% for Harris. At Apple, 95% for Harris. At Facebook, 97% for Harris. At Google, 98% of all political campaign contributions have gone to the Biden-Harris side. 100 venture capitalists signed a letter endorsing Kamala Harris. Broadly speaking, the American political establishment is scared to death of a second Donald Trump presidency. In the first Donald Trump presidency, they attempted to control Donald Trump, and that simply didn't work. And that accounted for a lot of the real churn in the first Trump administration. This Donald Trump, if he comes to office, will be coming in with a team ready to go, taking on that old American political establishment with an entirely new team from the ground up.
Final question to you, Mr. Babones. I want to ask you a little bit about the Harris base. What is this base? Here in India, we've heard a lot coming from her so-called ecosystem about our flagging democratic record, about the fact that there are minorities that are feeling distressed in this country, etc. How controlling is that base? Can Harris actually subdue it to be a more balanced, more pragmatic president with regards to directing policy towards India?
The fundamental core of the Harris vote is degreed professionals, relatively middle-class, upper-income degreed professionals. And that is a historic change in the structure of U.S. parties. The poor and less educated overwhelmingly are voting for Donald Trump. And that's even true of minorities, where we used to think of members of minority communities as overwhelmingly voting Democratic. They're still majority voting Democratic, but we're seeing something like 15 to 20% of African Americans voting for Trump. And to put that in perspective, that's up from virtually nothing 20 years ago. Something like 40% of Hispanic Americans voting for Trump. Now, if Harris wins, there's going to be no cataclysm and no real problem for India. I mean, let's just all take a step back and be a little honest about everything. India, good relations with India are strongly in the American interest. There's going to be no Justin Trudeau presidency in the United States. If there's a Harris presidency, they'll be a little more pragmatic. If it's a Trump presidency, they'll be more warm. But either way, the U.S. is going to do business with India, and that's not going to change.
What about this legacy that Biden leaves over the last 2 years, where things on the ideological issues look a little out of place? You've had America sort of lecturing us on how we should be sort of looking towards them and what we should be doing to protect our national interests and how we're stepping on American toes. We've had, sanctions now on some of our companies. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Look, of course, there are problems in any relationship between countries, and those problems will be a little tougher under a Harris administration than under a Trump administration. But a Trump administration is going to be very hard-nosed about promoting American interests, and Indians should be prepared for that. Look, there's going to be no Sheikh Hasina situation. Whoever wins this election is not going to attempt to overthrow the government of India. Nothing like that is going to happen. There will be slightly more pressure on India's supposedly negative human rights record if there's a Harris presidency. There will be slightly more pressure on India to make economic concessions towards the U.S. under a Trump presidency. Either presidency would push American interests and solely American interests in dealing with India. I don't think Indians need to be worried either way.
Mr. Bevins, thank you very much. Very exciting times, viewers. The next 12 hours, suspense. The Indian stock market didn't do very well, as you know, because it doesn't quite like what might be the outcome. And I'm not calling it for anyone. This is going to be a very tight election and a very tautly run campaign. Going into this election puts both these individuals on a very even footing. It's all going to depend on who comes out to vote and in how many numbers eventually. But let's move on, because viewers, we're going to sustain our focus on North America, Canada and India this time, viewers. Distraught at scenes of violence unleashed by murderous Khalistani thugs outside a temple or two in Canada, Prime Minister Modi had tweeted yesterday that Indians, especially Hindus, won't be cowed down. So viewers, let me tell you, they took to the streets in Brampton and Surrey, denouncing the attacks and pledging to fight for violence. There you can see them on the right. A large number of Hindus in their thousands, hundreds of thousands, hit the streets. The sight of Hindus hitting the streets has led to many in Canada expressing dismay at the rise of, quote, saffron brigades, unquote, that don't adhere to the Canadian way. Now, this is as if to say pro-Palestinian protesters chanting slogans in favor of Nasrallah do. And that has happened in Canada. No one raised their eyebrows to say, oh, well, you know, these Nasrallah acolytes are not in sync with the Canadian way. Or for the matter, the Khalistanis that extol the virtues of terrorists like Bhindranwale, when they take out their parades and processions, no one writes a dirge about how this is not the Canadian way. The Hindu minority in Canada are somehow marked, and one would have thought that all those ecosystem types on the left would have by now denounced the attack on the Hindu minority. But for some strange reasons, the quote, all eyes on Rafah, unquote, brigade are silent. They're even silent in our country, viewers. Prime Minister Modi has tweeted, but politicians at his level, that is, who are the supremos of their parties, have not. We've not heard from Mamata Banerjee on this attack on an Indian temple. We haven't heard from Rahul Gandhi. Who is the putative leader of the opposition, viewers. In fact, he is. We haven't heard of Akhilesh Yadav coming out, or even Lalu Prasad, or anyone from the opposition ranks that suggests that they are at the same level as Prime Minister Modi. Now, is this not hypocrisy, viewers? Let me jog your memory. Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, the Congress General Secretary, what did she say? In the past, she has said, viewers, and she's expressed outrage for the minority in Gaza. And she says, quote, what the international community has allowed in Gaza will go down in history not only as a great shame for the whole of humanity, but as a turning point for the human race. Being blind to genocide as it is carried out with impunity, turning our backs to the merciless slaughter of thousands of innocent children, refusing to step in, while an entire nation starves and begs for help, while hospitals are bombed, doctors tortured and humiliated, and patients allowed to die, enabling an oppressive regime by offering its ships, our ports, fueling its inhumane rampage by providing it more and more funding and arms. All this has now set a horrendous precedent. All rules of justice, humanity, and international decorum have been broken. Humanity has been bled, and each one of us will pay an unimaginable price for this someday unless we raise our voices and stand up for what is right today, viewers. Her heart was bleeding for Gazans, and she is critical of the Modi government assisting, allegedly, the Israeli government. But viewers, it doesn't beat for the Hindus in Brampton, in Surrey, in Canada. Swara Bhaskar took to Instagram, viewers, and she put out a story, all eyes on Rafah. She showed solidarity with Palestine via viral social media post. More than millions of hits. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, he said, I urge the government of Israel to exercise maximum restraint. The world is watching on TV, on social media. We are hearing the testimonies of doctors, family members, survivors, kids who have lost their parents. The world is witnessing this killing of women, of children, of babies. This has to stop, he said. Have you heard him, viewers? He couldn't even bring himself to name. He called out Israel, but he couldn't call out Khalistani insurgents on his own soil, viewers. And we have people in Canada who talk about, with great pride, their commitment to upholding democracy and minority freedoms and rights. And of course, in India, in the opposition. Viewers, we have a major problem here of hypocrisy. And let's ask some fundamental questions. Harrison Faulkner, Canadian journalist who was out there amongst those protesters yesterday and reporting from the ground, he was a bit appalled at the fact that all these people had poured out onto the streets and launched a counter-protest. Karan Verma, author, is here with us. Tehseen Poonawalla, political analyst. Tehseen Poonawalla, let me begin with you first. You're a humanist. You're a humanist. Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, Rahul Gandhi, all silent on these attacks. The Prime Minister thought it fit to question the Canadian government. Surely the leader of the opposition should have also said something. Do you agree, or maybe I'm overinflating things here?
You're absolutely overinflating things with respect and humility. Because the Prime Minister's tweet was half-baked. He didn't have the guts to take it. Yes, he should have taken the cane, taken the bull by the horns, called out that neo-toddler Justin Trudeau, who's responsible for this. But I'll tell you what, his foreign minister, our foreign minister, was busy making reels. On 30th October, Hindus wrote a letter to the Canadian authorities saying we will be attacked. Prior to this, Pannu has been on record on CBC TV Live saying he works with the current Prime Minister, neo-toddler Justin Trudeau's office, and he has threatened our Hindus that he will spoil the Diwali. Despite this, apart from making reels, the strongest man in the universe, his deputy, the second strongest man in the universe, and the real minister, who's also sometimes acts up as external affairs minister, did as much as 1 minus 1, that is 0. One more thing, this is a pattern. Hindus have been attacked in England, they've been attacked in Bangladesh only recently, and now in Canada. And yet, this government chooses not to learn. I'll tell you what, it is high time this government goes out, just like Justin Trudeau, the neo-toddler, should go out in Canada.
Well, viewers, you heard Tehseen Poonawalla once again gunning for the Prime Minister, which is fine. It's his prerogative. He's in the opposition space, but very cleverly skipping over the silence of Rahul Gandhi, who today, of course, viewers, ended up at a temple. There's a big photo op. There were 7 or 8 camera crews following him, and he posed for each one of them, got this photograph taken as he was kicking off his campaign. Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, whose heart bleeds, silent, maybe because she's fighting in Wayanad, a Muslim-dominated community, constituency. Karan Verma, what do you make of the silence? Is it mere omission? Or is there a deep-seated Hindu phobia here? Let me ask you very bluntly.
I think, Rahul, it's very clear. It's deep-seated Hindu phobia on steroids. And they've been very clear and explicit. I mean, when they have an alliance with parties that call for the eradication of Sanatan Dharma, I think we should not be surprised. Priyanka Vadra made it very clear. Bangladeshi Hindu lives don't matter to her. She was weeping and shedding those tears for those who were there in Gaza, but not a word for Bangladeshi Hindus or for Canadian Hindus. And what's happened in Canada is an absolute shame. And I think I mean, we've had many wake-up calls, but this is a very serious wake-up call for us. Just imagine this, Rahul. In Canada, Hindus are more than Sikhs, and yet they go out all the way to placate the Khalistani vote bank, and they don't care about Hindus because they know Hindus will still pour in billions into their economy, $30 billion every year to be precise. Hindu students go to Canada and pour into their economy. That brings their gig economy and real estate prices up. And they continue to slaughter the Hindus this way. And today, what's worse is, they've declared an order that the protest carried out by Hindus is illegal. Can you imagine the same Justin Trudeau who defended the farm protests in India and even the violence at the Red Fort on 26 January and said, oh, it's freedom of expression, it's the right to protest, today says that this protest is illegal. So this is the kind of man we are dealing with, and this is the kind of opposition, the Trojan horses that we are dealing with back in our country, who are fine with Hindu lives being lost and are very clear. We have to divide the Hindus. We see them as orphans of perhaps a lesser breed or whatever they call it, and they want to unite the other vote banks. So till the Hindus don't unite, till the Hindus stop sending their children to Canada, and I'm being very blunt here, because that's their lifeline. $30 billion we pump in every year. Till we don't give a forum for Newfoundland and Quebec, the two states that have expressed sentiments of separatism for Canada, we must give them a forum. Canada should understand what it feels like when we give a forum to elements from Quebec and Newfoundland, which are, by the way, being suppressed by the Canadian government, by a prime minister right now who enjoys little support. 20 MPs have stood up against Justin Trudeau. He's lost a by-election. He's also under inquiry for cash to access with regards to Chinese people. So this is the kind of dimwit we are talking about. Man who has zero credibility, who has almost blood on his hands because he allowed it to fester for years together, Rahul. So we shouldn't be surprised that this has happened. He was calling for it, nudging for it for years, and finally violence has raised its ugly head. So this is where we stand right now.
So you're calling them all out.
From the opposition.
You're calling the entire ecosystem out. Okay, Mr. Faulkner, here is what you said a day back. You said Khalistan protesters break into a Hindu temple in Brampton and start attacking people with sticks. This is Canada now, foreign religious conflict in our streets. It was a very matter-of-fact, zero editorializing tweet. And then, this is what you talk about a day later, when the Hindus decide that they're going to hold a peaceful protest, they're going to go across to the Gurdwara, and they're going to stand outside and denounce those who are being shielded by the state and who are too scared to face the facts. You say, and pay attention, viewers, he says, wild scenes happening now where a crowd of Hindus have blocked traffic and started chanting down and intimidating local police officers. Then he goes on to say only 4 police officers having to stare down, mind you, viewers, a crowd of thousands of Indian Hindu protesters accusing of them being soft on Khalistani extremism. Things are getting very tense in Brampton. You're almost suggesting that there is some great locust that is invading Canada. All this while, Mr. Faulkner, you've turned a blind eye to the original provocation and the provocateurs, people who've gone out there, flashed guns on your streets, and issued death threats to diplomats, Indian diplomats, taken out floats in large processions of a former Indian Prime Minister being shot dead. Why these double standards, Mr. Faulkner? Hindus less equal? Canadian Hindus less equal than any other minority or any other part of your country? Don't you include them as part of your own country and its ethos?
Well, of course I do, but I want to, you ask about double standards. I think what you've just read out is my reporting being accurate. That is exactly what happened yesterday. In fact, it was a lot better than what occurred after the fact. Let's talk about double standards here, Rahul. You have refused to mention what happened after that, which is an unruly scene of Hindu protesters attacking police, attacking random cars in the street. And I will say, if it wasn't for a small handful of Hindu protesters in that crowd forming a human chain link fence, the more aggressive and more dangerous members of that protest were going to go to a Gurdwara and could very well have done the exact same thing that you rightly criticize occurred to Hindus on Sunday. So I'm not quite sure what you mean here. I laid out exactly what occurred yesterday in that in that tweet you read, the same way I did on Sunday. Again, I'm not at all aware of whatever issue you're trying to bring up here.
Mr. Faulkner, why should I believe you? You could be looking at everything through a jaundiced eye. You said They could very well have done the same thing. This is an assumption. Yes. They didn't do it. They could very well have done. This is fear-mongering. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is a dog whistle. This is...
Okay, Rahul, why did they have weapons yesterday?
I don't know. If they have anyone been booked? Has anyone been booked?
So what kind of peaceful protest? What kind of peaceful
I'm
protest?
asking you, Mr. Faulkner, has anyone been booked by the Canadian police for possessing illegal weapons on the streets of Brampton?
I would assume that there were arrests. I'm not sure what charges were, but I'm sure...
I don't know if the charges...
I assume there were
I assume,
arrests.
He says. Okay.
Yes.
There are a lot of assumptions here. There are no concrete facts. Viewers, the hard facts are that someone let down, not once, not twice, not thrice, India and India's national interests in Canada, not over 1 year, not over 2 years, but the entire duration of the Trudeau presidency, prime ministership. Because viewers, Khalistanis have been given a free hand. And Tehseen Poonawalla and company, today, in the face, viewers, of this complete abandonment of the Hindu community, also patriotic Sikhs, viewers, patriotic Sikhs. The Congress party cannot speak up in one voice with the government of India. Yes, Tehseen Poonawalla, you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
I'm once again telling you, 30th October, there was written complaint that the Hindus would be attacked.
Sir, has Rahul Gandhi, I'm just asking you, has he tweeted a major attack on Hindus has taken place in Canada? I'm only asking you this question. Has he or has he not?
Is this attack because Rahul Gandhi is not tweeting?
I'm asking you, sir. I'm asking you. I'm asking you. Has he tweeted yes or no? He goes to a temple today to seek blessings, but could he speak up? No, go ahead.
All right. I've understood your question, so allow me to answer that. If this attack has happened because Rahul Gandhi is not tweeted, I will hold Rahul Gandhi responsible. But this attack has happened because the real minister, the foreign minister of India, is incompetent, and after a warning, he still couldn't act. So listen, the day Rahul Gandhi is Prime Minister, I will on your show ask Rahul Gandhi questions.
Mr. Verma, quick response.
Now ask him questions
now.
Leader of the opposition, completely missing in action. Yes.
In matters of national security, one second. In matters of national security, and if ever a Hindu or an Indian staying abroad is attacked, what one needs is a call for unity. And as the leader of the opposition, he should have come out and he should have said that, yes, we are one in this. No Hindu can be harmed in this fashion. Why did he maintain this deafening silence?
Point made. Don't blame the Faulkners of Canada, viewers. Don't blame them. If you as a country can't speak up as one, don't blame the Faulkners of Canada. Don't blame the Trudeaus of Canada. You don't deserve the respect. You don't deserve the dignity. I'll leave it at that.
This Diwali,
so it's the big election in America between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. While there is so much interest in India and around the world as to who will become the next president of the United States, it ultimately boils down to a bunch of swing states, some important communities, whether they show up at the vote or not. We'll also talk about the Indian American community, whether they are overwhelmingly Democrat or they split. Let's try and find a little bit more about this U.S. election, which is being closely watched, with Dhruv Jaishankar, Executive Director with ORF America. Thank you very much, Dhruv, for speaking with us. So, big picture, I mean, we're a day away from Election Day. Just how big is this election? What are the stakes?
It's a big election. It feels like every 4 years there's a big election in the U.S. It's a very divided polity. Roughly 45% of Americans vote Republican, 45% vote Democrat. And really it's only about 5 to 10% whose opinion has to be swayed each election. And the divides are quite deep across age lines, gender lines, cultural lines, rural, urban. I think there's a big divide there. So I think this is playing out again, as it is every 4 years.
What do you think it'll boil down to? I mean, in such a close race, is it the swing states? Is it who's motivated more? Is it anti-incumbency? What's the big X factor?
There are lots of X factors, which is what's making it hard to predict. The polls show pretty much a 50-50 split. 7 states will really determine this election. They're called the swing states. I find it hard to believe the winner will not be the winner of Pennsylvania. I think that will be a state that just mathematically, unless many other results go in a very unexpected manner, that's a state that both either candidate will have to win the election.
That's the biggest.
That's the biggest prize.
Swing
The biggest. And the margins are going to be very thin. So ultimately, it'll come down to voter enthusiasm for the two candidates. Whether more of Trump supporters come out to vote on election day, or whether more of Harris's voters come out. And that will happen tomorrow, and that will really determine the outcome.
So, one interesting thing, and I guess in elections past, other than the 2021, one new phenomenon we're seeing is a lot of people are voting early,
yes,
either by post or by mail-in, by in-person early voting. I think 75 million is the figure that I last checked. That's almost half the electorate.
Yes.
Is there anything in there for us to know that's perhaps the way in which this election is going?
So that has really changed a large part because of COVID. The last election happened during the pandemic, and that led to a lot more early voting. Traditionally, early voting has favored Democrats, and so those are counted later. That suggests that in many states we'll see a blue wave, a Democratic swing later. But it really will depend on a number of other factors. One of the things that's happened this time is this signs that more Republicans are voting early.
Okay.
So the balance may not be as skewed towards Democrats as in the past. But again, we'll only know after counting is completed.
Let's talk a little bit about the Indian American community. There's about 2.5 million of them. Generally they've been sort of Democrat leaning. This time, are you seeing anything different?
So traditionally about 2/3 are registered Democrats, about 25% are registered Republicans. There is some indication, there was a recent survey done by the Carnegie Endowment.
To this special edition of Vantage, we are coming to you live from the White House. It's around 10:30 a.m. here, a bright and sunny day, which is good news because Americans are voting today. We caught some glimpses on our way here, voters lining up to elect their next president. It's all up to them now. No more rallies or campaign ads. It's all about the voters' choice. And who will they pick? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? That's the big suspense. I know the question is on everyone's mind. When will we know the result? Well, if all goes to plan, maybe even tonight. Polls close at different times in different states because of different time zones in the US. It starts with 7 p.m. in Georgia, goes all the way up to midnight in Alaska. In 2008, 2012 and 2016, we